Before a little girl's silent plea for food drew JD Vance into an event that would alter their whole lives, he assumed it would simply be another supper. During that night, there was a stinging bite in the air that went deep into the bones and penetrated through thin layers of clothes. There were parked automobiles along the pavement outside Bill's Diner, a tiny but bustling location in Cincinnati, Ohio, their windshields fogged by the contrast between the chilly outside and the warm inside. There was a lot of activity going on inside, with servers balancing dishes, clinking silverware, and voices that blended into a monotonous chatter. It had the aroma of warm bread, fresh coffee, and sizzling burgers. However, just outside the diner's windows, a young girl remained still close to the door, clutching the straps of her battered rucksack. Her age could not have exceeded 10 years. Her cheeks were flushed from the cold, her face was smeared, and her bulky jacket barely fit her slender body. Her little hands were sucked up by the sleeves, which were made of torn cloth. She wasn't pleading or demanding attention. She was just waiting for someone to notice her, her gaze flitting between the individuals passing by. When the door opened, JD, with his breath catching in the cool air, Vance went outside. The slight smell of coffee lingered on his sleeves as he adjusted his coat, still bearing the warmth of the cafe. It had been a dull evening for him. After a peaceful supper and a little chat with an old buddy, it's a quick walk to his vehicle. However, he saw the girl as he turned to face the lot. She didn't look at him. She stared at the meal he was holding. The remains of his supper, a club sandwich and fries he hadn't eaten, were in the foam container, still warm on his hand. He watched as she licked her lips almost reflexively, then pressed them together as if she were stopping herself. Most individuals prefer to disregard moments like that. A fleeting look, a moment of unease, and then they dismiss it with a rationalization. I have no time. Someone else will assist. Perhaps she isn't really homeless. JD, however, did not go on. She looked up only as he made a stride in her direction. A range of emotions were seen in her eyes. Hiding, hunger, and something more difficult to pinpoint. Not quite faith, but not quite dread. A cautious optimism. Do you have any extra food, sir? She spoke in a little, cautious voice, as if she had requested too many times and been denied. JD let out a deep breath and looked down into her eyes. He could see the mud smeared over her forehead up close, as well as how her fingers clenched tightly around her backpack straps, her knuckles becoming slightly white from the pressure. Not because he didn't want to assist, but because he understood that this was about more than simply a meal. It was about how you react to people when no one else is there. Rather than transferring the container and leaving, he took an unexpected action. Making sure his knees were at eye level, he knelt down until they almost touched the chilly concrete. What's your name? The girl shifted her weight from one foot to the other as she hesitated. Strands of her disheveled hair flew into her face as the wind picked more speed. Rebecca. At last, her voice was hardly audible above a whisper. JD gave a nod and paused before continuing. Have you have any food today, Rebecca? She shrugged her shoulders slightly as if she didn't want to acknowledge the reality. Not at all. JD looked back at the restaurant, the pavement glowing a dull crimson from the neon open sign. He tightened his hold on the container in his palm, but he decided then and there not to give it to her. He sprang up and said, "Come on. Let's get something new for you." Rebecca was surprised by the reaction as seen by the small widening of her eyes. As like she was waiting for someone to reassure her that everything was well, she paused and looked toward the parking lot. JD took his time with her. All he did was hold the door open. With the scent of grilled meat and buttered bread, the diner's warm air poured out into the night. She remained still for a moment. She went inside after that. As soon as they entered the restaurant, the warmth of the place enveloped them. Rebecca was chilled by the abrupt drop in temperature, but she didn't voice any complaints. She just tightened her grip on her bag and maintained a low gaze as if she wasn't sure why she was there. JD looked around for an unoccupied booth. It was still crowded. A group of truckers conversing softly next to the counter, families completing their dinners, and a weary waitress restocking a man's coffee. They received no notice. After guiding her to a table by the window, he pulled out a chair for her and sat down opposite her. Rebecca sat rigidly as if she was waiting for someone to approach and order her to get out. Her little hands were folded inward on her lap and JD could see it. Her whole body clenched. With a notebook in hand, a waitress came up and said, "What can I get you?" without even looking up. JD gave Rebecca a nod and said, "Whatever she wants." Rebecca paused. Little things were nothing new to her. Leftovers. Anything that someone could spare. It seemed strange to order anything from a menu for herself alone. Anything, suggested JD. Go ahead. Her lips moved slightly, but she remained silent. The waitress softened somewhat as she sensed her uncertainty. Would you want a burger? She offered. At last, Rebecca gave a nod. With fries? Of sure. And to drink? She pondered for a while. Cocaine milk? JD grinned. She had never asked for anything without reluctance before. Rebecca looked down at the table as the waitress left, her fingers making an imaginary line over the scratched-up surface. Between them, silence descended. JD waited a bit before continuing. Where's your mother? Rebecca's fingers became still. She didn't raise her head. He waited for her to continue, but she didn't. At the shelter. And your father? Her hold on her backpack became somewhat more firm. I don't know. JD kept a close eye on her. He learned more by her response than from the words. What's the duration of your stay at the shelter? Rebecca gave a shrug. A while. She said in a level voice, but there was a look in her eyes. A silent acceptance that shouldn't exist in a 10-year-old. As if she had already learned to give up hope for improvement. JD studied her, leaning back in his chair. He had experienced growing up in an unstable environment. To question if a settlement would ever be reached. To act as if you were not hungry when in fact you were. To feel the burden of grown-up issues you weren't meant to bear. However, this was more than simply a difficult time. There was more to this. The anxiety was relieved when the dinner came. The waitress set the platter in front of Rebecca, who sat up a little straighter. A little glass of chocolate milk, a substantial heap of fries, and a substantial burger. She didn't hold off. She used both hands to pick up the burger and chewed quickly as if she thought someone would take it away. JD remained silent. Let her eat, he said. She eventually slowed down halfway through her meal and took a drink of her milk. Why do you want to assist me? She asked abruptly. JD looked her in the eye. Because you asked, Rebecca said, biting her lip in thought. JD ran a hand over the edge of the table and sighed, saying most people don't. The majority of individuals want to assist. They just don't know how. She nodded, but her eyes conveyed that she wasn't persuaded. There was quietness for a few minutes, broken only by the sound of dishes and soft chatter. It wasn't always like this, Rebecca whispered gently, and JD glanced up. What do you mean? She rearranged a fry on her plate. We had a place before my dad lost his job. An actual location. I was in my own bed. JD could sense the tension under her calm voice. Then he was gone and everything was different. JD didn't press and she didn't go into more detail, but he understood what she wasn't saying. Her slumped shoulders and her refusal to look him in the eye were signs of it. This was not the whole tale. However, he had a gut feeling that he would need to gain her trust before she would reveal anything. JD came to a realization as he sat there closely observing her. Buying her food wouldn't be enough to help her. The food was almost done. With her fingers greasy, Rebecca had slowed down and was enjoying the last few fries. Something JD recognized had taken the place of the original hunger. Reluctance. She knew what would happen next, not because she wasn't thankful. The evening. The chill. The ambiguity. JD rested his elbows on the table and spoke slowly. Your mother is at the shelter, correct? Rebecca wiped her hands on a napkin and nodded. Yes. Is she aware of your location? She hesitated for the first time since they sat down. She didn't know what the correct response was. Not because she was concealing anything. As she twisted the napkin in her hands, she confessed. She knows I go out sometimes to see if anyone has food left over or change. JD took a long breath. He had seen children being compelled to assume roles that were too large for them before. A youngster shouldn't be forced to plan for hunger or consider survival. Want me to take you to see her? He inquired. Rebecca tensed her shoulders. He didn't anticipate the response. She'll be upset if I return too soon, JD scowled. Why? Rebecca shrugged after biting her lip. Because she is exhausted. Due of her sadness. She said it bluntly, as if she were repeating something she had already come to terms with. Because nothing ever gets better. Something weighed heavily on JD's chest. A blast of chilly air rushed in when the front door opened before he could reply. A female entered. Her body was swallowed by a coat that was 2 sizes too large, and her black, matted hair was twisted back into a loose ponytail. Her eyes were frantic and seeking. JD and Rebecca both spotted her at the same moment. She stiffened, clutching the table's edge. The lady saw Rebecca and said, "That's my mom." Her expression was a mixture of relief and annoyance. She took a couple brisk strides across the restaurant. "Where on earth have you been?" She seemed to be attempting to control her voice, which was low and harsh. She grabbed Rebecca's arm to draw her near to her, not to harm her. Rebecca flinched just a little and JD saw it. "I was merely eating," Rebecca muttered. The woman's countenance hardened when she finally turned to face JD. "Who are you?" JD leaned back and spoke calmly. "Just someone who bought her dinner." The woman's eyes darted to the empty dish as her jaw tensed. She seemed appreciative, protective, and humiliated. Simultaneously, she said, "She shouldn't be disturbing people." JD gave a headshake. She wasn't. She only requested food. The woman's shoulders slumped as she let out a breath. JD could see the fatigue on her face now that she was closer. Dark rings, deep lines. The type of fatigue that was unabated by sleep. She softened a little and turned to Rebecca. Rebecca didn't resist when she said, "You can't just run off." She just dropped her head and re-grasped the strap of her rucksack. Before he spoke, JD closely observed the exchange. "What is the duration of your stay at the shelter?" The lady paused, clenching her fists before letting them down. "A few months," she acknowledged. It's what we have, not what I wanted." JD nodded, allowing her to carry on. "I spent years working in a warehouse," she remarked in a strained voice. "Then came the layoffs. One thing paved the way for another. The rent increased, and that was all." She cut her remarks short. She had previously recounted this tale too many times, not because she didn't want to speak. Furthermore, nothing had changed. JD has already observed this cycle. Homelessness wasn't something that happened suddenly. It was fragmented. A loss of employment. A bill was overlooked. A vehicle breaking down. Before you knew it, you had no lifeline and were struggling to keep afloat. He let out a breath when he saw Rebecca lean on her mother, serving as a quiet warning of the danger. "What if I could assist?" JD inquired. Astonished, the lady blinked. "Aid?" JD gave a nod. "I am aware of a location. A non-profit organization. They assist families in rebuilding their lives. Work, accommodation, everything." The lady looked closely at him. Not suspicious. "I'm just fed up with hollow promises." "Are you a politician or what?" "What?" she inquired. JD gave a little chuckle. "That kind of stuff." She rubbed her forehead and let out a breath. "I don't need freebies, you see. I just—" She interrupted, swallowing forcefully. JD looked her in the eye and said, "I just want a chance to fix this. Then allow me to assist you in obtaining that opportunity." She did not immediately respond. However, there was a change in her stance. She gave herself hope for the first time since she entered. However, JD was aware that just offering assistance was not enough to convince her to accept it. It took some time for the tension around the table to subside. As if anticipating the catch, the woman, Rebecca's mother, studied JD intently. There were always conditions attached to help. She had to learn that lesson the hard way. Rebecca's little fingers gripped the edge of the booth seat as she stared in silence, still resting against her mother. She had never seen her mother hesitate before. Decisions were often made hastily, out of need rather than choice. JD took his time with her. "You don't have to make a decision just yet," he said in a firm voice. Still cautious, Rebecca's mother shook her head, saying, "But I want you to know it's an option. You're not understanding. These programs and venues require you to go through a lot of hoops." JD sensed the hatred in her voice as she said, "They want you to prove you're worth saving." The way the system broke individuals down before it put them back together was something he had seen before. He told her, "This isn't like that. They don't only provide a bed for the night and call it assistance." With a quick exhale, she stroked her temples and said, "They find solutions. What if I'm not a part of their system? What if they determine that we are not an issue for them?" JD put his elbows on the table and leaned forward. She gave him another glance and said, "I'll make sure they don't." Glanced closely. "Why are you even concerned?" JD maintained eye contact. "Because I was once cared for by someone." Between them, the weight of his words sunk. "And it changed my life." Rebecca looked up, her weary eyes glimmering with interest. No more was offered by JD. Not quite yet. It has nothing to do with him. Making her think that this wasn't simply another vacuous offer was the goal. However, a voice from across the cafe cut her off before she could reply. "Pardon me, sir?" JD turned and saw a middle-aged guy standing directly in front of him. Hands worn from labor, broad shoulders, and a badge fastened to his belt. A police officer. Rebecca tensed up. The cop cleared his throat and said, "Her mother did too. Is everything in this place all right?" JD's mouth clenched. He was aware of this. A youngster and a homeless-looking lady are seated at a restaurant with a well-dressed guy. People didn't seem to enjoy what they saw. Rebecca's mother spoke before JD could reply. Her tone was abrasive and combative as she said, "We're fine," the tone that resulted from too many negative encounters. The policeman stayed. He looked at JD instead. "Sir?" JD maintained a neutral face. The officer paused before saying, "I said we're fine." A beat later, he nodded slowly and turned to go. Rebecca let out a quiet sigh. This was nothing new to her. The looks, the verdict, the manner in which individuals made assumptions without any knowledge. Her mom gave a headshake. She murmured, "That's why I don't take handouts." JD gave her remarks some time to sink in. People think you're a problem before they even know your name. She was correct. She didn't have to face this obstacle alone, however. JD took out a pen and a little notebook from his pocket. He scrawled something, passed the sheet across the table, and tore it. "This is the nonprofit's number. Call them if you decide to alter your mind." Rebecca's mother hesitated before accepting the paper, but then she said, "Tell them I sent you." JD was unsure whether she would put it to use. At least she had a choice now. And Rebecca's voice interrupted him as he got up to go. "Whatever happened to you?" JD stopped and glanced down at Rebecca. For a while, he thought he had dreamed the question since she had uttered it so softly. She wasn't letting it go, however, as seen by the puzzled, worn-out, and almost frantic look in her eyes. Her mother moved around in her chair, looking at them but remaining silent. Rebecca continued to inquire despite her questioning. She also didn't press for a response. JD let out a breath and tightened his coat. "This town is not too far from the one where I grew up. We had very little. Nothing at all some nights. She struggled, my mom." He stopped, his eyes unwavering. "And I waited a long time for someone to take attention. Someone who cares." Rebecca's fingertips tinkled with the backpack strap's edge. "Did they?" JD gave a slow nod. "Some did. Specifically one. It was still visible to him. The little kitchen of his granny. The scent of burned toast and strong coffee. Every time he attempted to skip school, she would give him a fierce look. She never let me go hungry even though she didn't have much. And she gave me the impression that I might escape." Rebecca's mother swallowed hard. "And did you?" JD paused. "Yes, but with some scars." He didn't speak about it very much. People saw the accomplishments, the outfit, and the title. The evenings he pondered if he would ever break free from the cycle were not visible to them. Rebecca sat back and took in what he had said. She was aware that not all stories ended happily since she had lived long enough. With a sigh, her mother rubbed her hands together to get warm. Her tone softened and became less defensive as she said, "It's not that I don't want help. It's just, as JD put it, every time I think we're going to get a break, something knocks us right back down." He'd seen it before. Individuals poised on the brink of hope. They had been burnt too many times and were too scared to come forward. What if things are different this time? What, he inquired. Rebecca's mother took a while to respond. She was worn out, too exhausted to trust in miracles. At that moment, the restaurant door opened once again. 2 males entered this time. The previous officer was one of them. The other, a sharp-eyed guy in a gray suit, whispered to him softly before they both turned to face their table. Rebecca was the first to notice. She tensed up. JD realized what was going on right away. They had received a call. The cop approached and cleared his throat. Rebecca's mother's face became pale as she said, "Ma'am, we received a call regarding a child in distress." "What?" Her voice was harsh with a hint of fear. Flashing a badge, the guy in the suit moved forward. Rebecca tightened her hold on her mother's arm and said, "CPS, we need to ask you a few questions." Before her mother could react, JD got up. "This is an error," he said firmly. The CPS employee remained unflinching. Are you related, sir? JD's jaw tightened. No, the employee said, turning back to Rebecca's mom. That was the issue, however. Ma'am, we just need to confirm your situation. We're not here to take your child away. It wasn't always true, and that statement had been repeated far too often. Rebecca's mom breathed more rapidly. She had put up too much of a fight to protect her kid. She took Rebecca's hand and said, "We're going." Her route was barred by the cop. Rebecca's chest rose and sank more quickly as she said, "Ma'am, we have the right to escalate this if you refuse to cooperate." Being invisible was nothing new to her. Now, however, everyone was watching her. JD made a decision in seconds. Here, he was powerful. Have an impact. He also had no intention of allowing this to occur. He took his phone out. "You should take a step back." The CPS employee scowled. "Pardon me?" JD's voice had become harsh. "I am well aware of how this works. Instead of offering assistance to a suffering family, you threaten to split them apart. Let me clarify one point, however. I'll make sure the story is heard if you pursue it further," the employee said hesitantly. The cop moved unsure. JD did not flinch. Instead of punishment, they need assistance. There was silence between them, therefore I advise you to leave unless you have genuine answers. The CPS employee then let out a deep sigh. "We'll follow up later," he said before turning to go. After a little pause, the officer gave a small, almost contrite, nod. Then came next. Rebecca breathed out slowly. Her mother's hands continued to shake. JD put down his phone. "That's what I mean," he murmured softly. "This time can be different." Rebecca's mother gave him a glance and nodded for the first time. JD was aware that persuading her to accept assistance was only the first step. The real battle was just getting started. After the CPS officer and employee departed, the restaurant became quieter. But there was still some tension in the air. Rebecca continued to grip her mother's sleeve, and her mother, in spite of the fatigue etched on her face, clung to her with equal vigor. JD gave them a break. He has experienced being besieged and having outsiders doubt your capacity to live without providing any practical answers. With a sigh, Rebecca's mother touched her forehead. JD leaned forward and said, "I swear, it seems like the world is waiting for us to make a mistake." She laughed bitterly and said, "That's because no one is built to do this alone." "Then why do we feel compelled to?" JD took a while to respond. Therefore, she was correct. With his fingertips delicately touching the table, he inhaled slowly. "I am acquainted with the director of a downtown family resource center. It's not a place to stay. There's a real program, a route out. They do more than just provide you with food and send you on your way." Rebecca's mother let out a harsh sigh. "They help with housing, jobs, childcare, whatever you need." "I've heard that before." JD remained silent. Rather, he extracted his wallet from his coat pocket. He slipped a folded card toward her after placing it on the table. "Not money. Not charitable. Only a number. Give them a call. Inform them that I sent you. There won't be a waiting list for you." He let out a sigh and hesitated before taking it up, saying, "You won't be forgotten." JD saw a change in her face for the first time. It wasn't trust. Not quite yet. However, it marked the start of something near. Rebecca, who had been quiet for some time, now spoke. "Does going there mean we won't have to stay in the shelter for the night?" Her mother looked at JD and gulped. She didn't have to guess for once. She had a response. "Perhaps." Rebecca's little shoulders eased somewhat. It was not a commitment, but there was hope. Even if just for tonight, JD watched as the burden of survival gradually eased piece by piece. At that moment, the same waitress who had been there before walked up to the table and hesitated before saying anything. Your meal is covered," Rebecca's mother said, blinking. "I don't mean to interrupt." "What?" An elderly guy in a flannel jacket was sitting at the counter, finishing his coffee when the waitress pointed to him. He nodded slightly, then averted his gaze. Rebecca's mother turned to see the guy get up, put on his coat, and go outside into the cold. He took care of it. She gave a headshake. "I don't understand," JD said with a little grin. The waitress shifted on her feet and cleared her voice, thinking perhaps someone just wanted to help. "Additionally, breakfast is on the house if you return tomorrow morning," the owner added. Rebecca's mother gaped at her in disbelief. She was not used to this. She finally laughed, a breathy, almost incredulous chuckle. "I guess I have no justification for not calling." JD shrugged. "I suppose not." That evening, Rebecca grinned for the first time. After placing the card in her coat pocket, her mother rose up and straightened the tattered cloth draped over her shoulders. She wasn't going home empty-handed for the first time in a long time. JD, however, was aware. Since hope was only as powerful as what you did with it, the actual job began at this point. As soon as they were outdoors, the night air assaulted them. Something about the cold seemed different now, yet it was still as harsh. Almost lighter. As if the burden bearing down on Rebecca's little shoulders had changed. Even if just little. With his hands in his coat pockets, JD followed them to the curb. He was not yet prepared to go. With a deep exhale, Rebecca's mother looked down at the pavement and then up at JD. Before responding, JD looked at her for a while and said, "I still don't know why you did all this." Her brow wrinkled slightly as if she wasn't sure whether to accept it. "Because someone once did it for me." No more was offered by JD. It wasn't necessary to explain anything. Rebecca used the toe of her shoe to kick a loose rock. "Do you believe they will really assist us?" JD lowered himself a little to eye level. "Determining that you deserve the assistance is the hardest part," Rebecca's mother said, taking a deep breath and turning away. Perhaps because he was correct. Perhaps because it had never been presented that way before, they all remained silent for a while. The flickering neon lights from the restaurant, the distant buzz of traffic, and the odd yelp of a stray dog. As if nothing had changed for this little household, the night continued. Then, carefully, Rebecca's mother took the card that JD had given her out of her pocket. Before she had a chance to second-guess herself, she took out her phone and brushed her thumb over the elevated letters. Rebecca's eyes widened as she saw her mother dial. The chat didn't have to be heard by JD. He did nothing except observe. When someone picked up, Rebecca's mother's shoulders lowered a little. As she described her predicament, her fingers stopped trembling. The way she spoke as if she thought things would change for the first time all night. She looked up at JD and cleared her throat after hanging up. JD nodded. "They said they'll see us first thing in the morning." Rebecca grabbed her mother's hand and squeezed it, saying, "Good." She didn't have to worry where they were going next for once. JD took a step back toward his vehicle and took out his keys. He was done with his role in their tale. They were in charge of the remainder. Rebecca yelled as he opened the door. "Wait," he said, pausing and looking across. After a moment of hesitation, Rebecca moved closer. "Thank you," JD said with a grin. "You're welcome." Rebecca's mother nodded as well, her hands tightening around her daughter. Perhaps she was still not persuaded. Perhaps there was still some question. However, she had made up her mind. And that had some significance. JD got into his vehicle, turned on the ignition, and drove off. In his rearview mirror, the two people on the sidewalk became smaller as the restaurant vanished into the distance. However, he suspected that he would hear about them again. Kindness spread further than anybody could see in some cases. And sometimes, the simplest thing may have a permanent impact on someone's life. Don't let this tale be simply another thing you heard and forgot if it touched you. Examine your surroundings. There may be someone waiting for assistance. All you need to do is observe.